Hi, in this video I'm going to go over a little bit of what I went over in the last video I did. I wanted to kind of add some things. I had talked about biases and logical fallacies, and later when I was watching the video again, I kind of realized something that I'd never noticed before. And then I also want to go over a few more of the biases and also the logical fallacies this time. So what I realized the other day was that the biases really have more to do with this lower portion, okay? And so the biases have to do how we relate to the material we're looking at, right? So we can have and I'm going to go over the biases in a minute, but it has to do with how we feel about it. Do we have a bias about one or the other? And again, and another thing that I was noticing the other day is I put these in two, but there could be multiple options, right? But I think for simplicity's sake, let's just look at it like there's two options, and then if there's more, obviously. It has to, like reality has to exist in one of them, right? Yeah, so I just want to kind of clarify that also. But anyway, so the biases can happen down here. The logical fallacies, tend to happen up here as it relates to either scripture or, if we're backing away from, just like everyday stuff, making good decisions in general, whatever you're trying to achieve would be up here, right? So if it's becoming more like Christ, then we put the Bible there. If it's making good business decisions, you would fill in the blank, right? Like whatever it is. So anyway, so I'm gonna add that in also. So up here we have logical fallacies, and these are where these are applied. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to go over a few of these. And also, I wanted to address one other thing. I put God made the rules of logic, not men. And, basically, I put, God made the rules of logic when he built the universe, right? We just happen to figure out these, logical fallacies and biases, and we understand, like our understanding of these things is not some ungodly man-made thing, right? It's like God made the universe. It's made a certain way. We interact with reality and the universe in a certain way, and logical fallacies are these mishaps that we take in our approach to reason. So I feel like there's this this is like this unknown thing for some people, and I like it really shouldn't be. We should all be able to articulate and be able to, understand what we're looking at. We should be able to understand the world we live in, and understanding that the rules of logic and things like that helps to, be able to grasp what's happening, whether or not we are, letting biases, misinform our brains, or if we are actually, being diligent in the way that we're doing things, no matter what it is. With that being said, I want to get into these, and it's kind of ironic. I picked out 9 logical fallacies, and then I was digging through the biases, and I picked out 9 of those. So I'm going to go through the logical fallacies first, because I did go through a few of these biases the other day, but anyway, all right, so the first one is appeal to authority. Using the opinion or position of an authority figure or institution of authority in place of an actual argument. So this is where somebody is, you're just saying, well, so-and-so believes this, so-and-so said this, so-and-so thinks this. And you see this in marketing a lot, used 3 of 5 doctors, use this medicine, right? That doesn't mean that it's good, right? But it's an appeal to authority, so that's a fallacy. that people fall into. All right, the next one is the bandwagon fallacy, and it's kind of similar to the bias of the groupthink. It's kind of related to that, but anyway, appealing to popularity. But this is doing it in an argument. So when it's a bias, it's an internal thing, right? Going back to this. But when it's a logical fallacy, now you're making an argument based on this information, right? So appealing to popularity, or the fact that many people do something as an attempted form of validation. So it's saying that, like, because because a bunch of people do this, then therefore it has to be right, not necessarily. Okay. All right. So next thing. Oh, and I should also say that, like, the bandwagon or the groupthink is a heuristic. People use this as a heuristic to say that, well, generally, the group is probably right, which might be true, but not always. So therefore, we can't assume that it's right, or we are committing the bandwagon fallacy. Okay. False cause, presuming that a real or perceived relationship between things means that one is the cause of the other. So in other words, saying that, well, something caused something else when it could have actually been something else that caused it. Does that make sense? So it's unduly deriving the causation of something and misassigning that or appropriating that. So that's the false cause, or yeah. So okay, the next one is begging the question, which it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a circular argument in which the conclusion is included in the premise. So it's like saying that an iPhone is the best smartphone because Apple makes the best smartphones. Okay, like what I just said is included in the ending that I arrived at. So so you'd have to already believe the end result in order to put it this way. So here's the topic, okay, up for debate, and here is the end point. I'm going to put a plus there, okay. And so we're going down this journey, we encounter this issue, and then we say, okay, we make a claim that this is true, or your opinion of this is true, because of something that could only be true if this is actually true. But if this is not true, then the argument that the person made is not true, okay. So again, like Apple or iPhone is the best smartphone because Apple makes the best smartphones. That's still like the opinion of somebody saying that the iPhone is best is based on, or the reason they're citing is they say because Apple makes the best smartphones. So because of that, they've cited that as the causation. Okay, and it's not really valid because it requires the thing that they're arguing about to be true in order for their statement to be true. That one can be a little confusing. All right, but being able to recognize it is good. All right, so appeal to emotion, manipulating an emotional response in place of a valid or compelling argument. So in other words, just actually, I think they put a good one on here. Yeah, Luke didn't want to eat his sheep's brains with chopped liver and Brussels sprouts. Wonder why. But his father told him to think about the poor, starving children in a third world country who weren't fortunate enough to have any food at all. So he appealed to his son's emotion. I did this the other day, except it was not with food. So here's a good difference. So his is a fallacy. The way I did it was not a fallacy. So he's appealing to Luke's not wanting to eat his sheep's brains with chopped liver by saying that there's kids in third world countries. That's actually the reason he should be grateful, not necessarily the reason that he should eat it. Why he should eat it is because allegedly sheep brains is good for you, okay, or are good for you. Chopped liver, I guess, the same, of course, and Brussels sprouts, of course. But the argument I made was my son was wanting his brother's sippy cup, right? And so he was like, well, I want that one. And so we watched like a video of, kids in third world countries who drink, water that's not sanitary. And then I was telling him, well, you need to, be grateful, and that's a valid argument. I'm saying that, that his sippy cup, like which sippy cup he uses, is not, all that important in the grand scheme of things. He has clean water to drink, right? And so, from the perspective of that being him being grateful, that's not a logical fallacy. That's a very good polarity to show in order to inspire gratefulness. Now, of course, I'm still appealing to his emotion, but it's not a fallacy, right? But appealing to Luke's emotions about kids in third world countries being the reason he should eat that's not the reason he should eat it. He should eat it because it's healthy. Okay? So again, that was appeal to emotion. All right, genetic fallacy. Judging something as good or bad, or I would like to put in here right or wrong, correct or incorrect, on the basis of where it comes from or from whom it comes. Okay, so that's, a broken clock is right twice a day, and some of the most evil people on earth could be right about certain things. And it doesn't take a professional to be right about some things. Like you might have somebody who's not professional and they're right about something. Citing, well, you're not a professional in this area, like it doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, So genetic fallacy, personal incredulity. This means that, saying that because one finds something difficult to understand, that it's therefore not true. So it means you personally don't have the capacity to understand it. Does not mean that it's not true. Or maybe a person is unwilling to try to understand it. Okay. Ad hominem, attacking your opponent's character or personal traits in an attempt to undermine their argument. Okay, so this is moving away from the realm of logic and moving into, this is usually where arguments devolve. It's like name calling, digging up whatever, irrelevant dirt to the whatever's being discussed, right? This is, of course, something that requires somebody else, typically, I would say. Whereas a lot of the logical fallacies you can commit in your own head, right? So that's kind of, this one's a little bit interesting, because a lot of the logical fallacies, like a lot of times you're formulating your own opinions, right? So but are we doing it fallaciously, or are we doing it correctly? Okay, so the next one is, and this is the last one for the fallacies, is the straw man. And I've seen this one a bit. It's misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. Okay, so I was reading a book, and well-known guy, and it's a book that is theological and antithetical to my view on a particular issue. And so he starts off in the intro poisoning the water, which is another logical fallacy that's not actually in this deck. But then he goes in later and he starts describing, the view that I hold, and so he described it very poorly. It was I think ridiculous is probably the best word for it, and so he set up the straw man, and of course he defeated it because it was a terrible argument that he made, an antithetical argument that he made. Of course, his regular argument was maybe arguably equally, bad. So anyway, but misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. So it's, I think they give an example of this actually. It was pretty good. Yeah. So here's like a very generic general example. After Bob said that we should be nice to kittens, Will says Bob wants to be mean to puppies. Everyone boos Bob because clearly. Everyone boos Bob, who is clearly a mean jerk for wanting to hurt poor, cute puppies, right? Bob never said that. Bob said that he, we should be nice to kittens. Well, Will says that Bob wants to be mean to puppies. So see, like there's that's a misinterpretation also. And my dog is over here, like, I don't know. Anyway, so it's like in this one, it was falsely said what he did. It doesn't have to be false, like what the person said. It can be incomplete. It's another form of it being false, right? So what I'm saying in this example, it was completely misrepresented. it was a flat out lie. Whereas a lot of times it's a subtle misrepresentation. So, okay, biases. All right, so 9 more. We'll try to make through these pretty quick. Dunning-Kruger effect. The less you know, the more confident you're likely to be. Okay. Pretty self-explanatory on that one. So if you are pretty sure of something, if you're familiar with this argument but you're not familiar with that argument, and not being familiar with both, you tend to just be very certain about the one you're familiar with, right? And so yeah, without looking at both, you can't possibly be sure. Or if there's 3 or 4 or 5, you need to understand them all, or at least you could balance the heuristic of what are the top 3 that most people feel, and then start looking at them and saying, okay, which one actually makes sense. Okay, anchoring. The first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. Okay, so again, like people grew up in church, and I gave this in the example in the last video. People grew up in church. They learn something a certain way. They become biased of that theology or something like that. And then everything else that they perceive is either viewed, I don't want to necessarily say positive, negative, but it might influence the importance of, let's say that's 2 true things, right? It could influence the importance of one over the other or something like that, which could give somebody kind of a little bit of a shaky, perception of like how much importance A and B should have compared to each other. Okay. Moving on, confirmation bias. You favor things that confirm your existing beliefs. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's, maybe somebody knows this argument, doesn't know this argument, and everything they hear, they just kind of like, they find things that help confirm this while neglecting a true view of the antithetical position, right? Okay, so belief bias. If a conclusion supports your existing beliefs, you'll rationalize anything that supports it. And this is really close to the confirmation bias, except that in this case, the confirmation bias is you favor things that confirm your existing beliefs a little more than you would something that does not. Whereas belief bias is more like even if it's irrational or something that you would normally think is irrational, you might confirm it, or you might believe it, or add it to your list of reasons why you believe a certain thing over another, even if it's not really something that you would normally do. I'm trying to think of an example of that. It's just not coming to me. But anyways, the backfire effect. When your core beliefs are challenged, it can cause you to believe them even more strongly, okay? So somebody challenges this, you go on the offense, or the defense, I should say, and you start aggressively, defending this, maybe without even looking at the tenets of an antithetical argument. And in doing so, it backfires. Like you may be wrong and not realize it, and yet you're hardening yourself in that view, right? Which, can leave you ignorant. And anyway, so groupthink. You let the social dynamics of a group situation override the best outcomes. So again, this is like growing up in a certain church or going to a certain church, and the social construct that you're in can manipulate, influence, I think is probably a better word. It's not necessarily always manipulative, but influence how you think and how you perceive and things like that. So the framing effect. You allow yourself to be unduly influenced by context and delivery, okay? And I'm going to read the little excerpt here. No one likes to think of themselves as easily manipulated. However, it's only when we have the intellectual humility to accept the fact that we can be influenced that we can limit how much we actually are influenced. Try to be mindful of how things are being framed and what's being left out. So framing is setting a particular view of something without bringing in all the antithetical arguments. Okay, so back to the book I was reading, the guy starts out poisoning the water. He's framing me. I'm aware of this as I'm reading it, right? I'm like, he's framing it. And he's framing it emotionally and all these other things. And then later he continues to frame, right, and so he gets to the antithetical argument to the position that he's arguing for, and he frames that in a certain way, and it's not at all like what it should look like, and so anyway, so like you got to be aware of like how something's being positioned to you, even if everybody believes it. You know, it doesn't matter. Okay, in-group bias. You unfairly favor those who belong to your group. Okay, I don't really think that needs much explanation. The in-group bias, or bias with your own clique. And I think this is the last one. Yeah, reactance. You'd rather do the opposite of what someone is trying to make you do. Okay, and this kind of ties back to the backfire, effectively. Yeah. So the backfire effect is when your core beliefs are challenged, it can cause you to believe them even more strongly. Whereas reactance, you'd rather do the opposite of what someone is trying to make you do. So this is more about sense of autonomy, not being controlled, I guess, somewhere more along those lines. These are really similar, actually. The backfire effect is you're still hardening yourself against it, but are you hardening yourself because you believe passionately in this other thing, and you've maybe made the logical errors of not actually looking at the antithetical, or is your motivation that you're just reacting to not want to say you don't, Bearball, quiet buddy. Let's say that you are, you don't like the person, okay, that's pitching this other idea, right? And so for that reason, you just you're not budging. You just you have this natural want to defend your position because you don't, it's reactionary to this side of things rather than a solid, even if it's ignorant, but a solid belief in the main thing you believe. So, yeah, I think this is probably about it. I can't think of anything else that I was going to say on this. So, yeah. So, but the real thing that even got me to even do this video was when I realized that the biases are really down here, and the logical fallacies are really up here. So I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to share that. So, all right, that's it for this video.